Hey guys, it's Miss Nieto, and I am coming to you today to do our reading mini lesson. So today we're going to talk about determining and recording on our reading list if a book is easy, just right, and difficult. And if you remember, it's been maybe about a couple weeks, we talked about how do we determine if a book is easy, just right, or difficult when we read it. So we talked about that if it's difficult, we are not going to know a lot of the words and we're not going to be able to understand it. If it's too easy, we're going to be able to read that book really fast. So, we don't want to get books that are too easy where we're just running through them quickly. If it is a just right book, we know most all of the words. It is okay if we don't know a couple of the words. And when you read it, you're able to understand what you are reading. Now remember, just right books is where we want to be when we're picking a book, okay? Not difficult, not easy, but just right. Kind of would think like the Three Little Bears when Goldilocks goes in and tries to find all the things that are just right for her. So that's what we're looking for when we read a book. So I have my reading list that we talked about in a previous mini lesson where we talked about making a reading list in our journals, writing the title down, the author, the genre code. And if you notice, today I added something to the end of my column and I put a letter D. I want you to think for a minute, why do you think I would have put a letter D for the book, The Absent Author? I want you to think for a minute, why do you think I put a D there? Okay, if you thought that I put the D there because I'm telling myself that that book was too difficult, you are correct. This column, the very last column where it says E, J, R, and D, that's telling me that when I read that book, I'm going to go to my reading list and I'm going to put down that was a difficult book. So D means difficult. That means that book was way too hard for me. And that is okay. You may pick up a book and start reading it and you already have it on your reading list because remember, you're filling out the title and the author before you start reading. And you may put a D there because it is difficult. That's okay. Now you know that later on, the more that I keep reading, maybe later on I'm able to read this book. So let's look at the next one. Captain Awesome to the Rescue. And I put an E. What do you think? I want you to take a minute and think about why do you think I would have put an E? I read the book and I came back to my reading list and I wrote an E there. Why do you think I would have done that? Okay. If you said that I wrote the letter E there because the book was too easy, you are correct. So before I started reading, I wrote down my title on my list and my author and the genre code. And I started reading the book and I knew every single word in that book and I read it really fast. That's telling me that this book is too easy. So that now that I know on my list, when I look through all the books I've read, I can say, I remember that book was way too easy. I need to try to find one that's just right. Okay? And then let's look at the Avalanche book. So before I read the Avalanche book, I wrote my title, I wrote my author, and then I finished reading the book and I came back to my reading list and I wrote JR next to it. I want you to take a minute. Remember when we talked about difficult, easy, and just right books, why do you think I would have wrote a JR in this column? Okay. So if you said that I wrote this because it's a just right book, you are correct. JR means just right. So I wrote those letters because the book is just right for me. It wasn't too difficult and it wasn't too easy. And I understood everything I read in the book. That's an important thing, guys. Just because I can read all of the words, but if I don't understand what I'm reading, if I was to say, what was your book about? And you couldn't tell me anything about it, then that, even though you were able to read all the words, that's not a just right book. You have to be able to understand what you're reading. So you understood it, you enjoyed the book, and you knew almost all the words, and I could solve the rest. That means that this is a just right book for you. So in the last column of our reading list, that is where we're putting if the book was too difficult, too easy, or just right. And we use the D for difficult, the E for easy, and the JR for just right. So that's what we're doing there. So what I want you to do for today is, well, before that, why do you think it's important to pay attention to whether a book is easy, just right, or difficult? Okay, so after we get done with this lesson, I want you to answer that for me. I want you to answer, why do you think it's important that we pay attention to whether a book is difficult, easy, or just right? So I want you to answer that at the end of this video in the responses. And then what I want you to do is, when you're reading today, I want you to think about and write, after you get done with your book, I want you to think about your book, and in your reading list, I want you to write down whether that book was easy, difficult, or just right for you. Okay? All right, guys. I will see y'all later.